welcome back to my channel. In this video we are going to be discussing this gorgeous dress I made inspired by the Cancer zodiac sign. In this video we're going to be talking about the pattern, where I got it. We are going to be talking about the changes I made, the materials I used, and also some sewing tips from me to you. And if you're interested, keep on watching. Now, starting with the materials, I'm going to be using this white guinea fabric and also this Ankara fabric for the underbust corset design I decided to go for. Of course, we are going to be tying a matching gele because, hello. Anyway, it was a matching set from one of my friend's wedding and I felt like let's just use it. Then I'm going to be using two types of lining. The white will line my skirt and the black lining will line my underbust corset. Structure is very needed. Then I'm going to be using two types of interfacing. The paper stay is very light and I'll be using that for my lining, and the hair stay I'll be using that for my Ankara fabric. Now, the next thing we're looking at is teru. See, teru saved my life. If you know, or calico. I've been looking for it, but I finally found it. And I would recommend, if you want to test your patterns, you use teru or calico. Next, of course, we are using boning. For this corset, I used 3 yards of boning for reference. Then I'll be using a black bias for my boning channels and a white zipper for the closure. Of course, we are going to use stones. It's a Nigeria cloth. I wanted to use appliques actually, but I decided to go for stones. Of course, I spilled it on the table because that's just how life is. Then we use the matching thread and let's get started. Now, regarding the pattern, I followed this tutorial by Style by Reme, and you can actually check that out. She went really in detail. I'll just be explaining the changes that I made, and this is pretty standard for any corset you want to make, whether it's underbust or main corset. And the change I made to mine was to add ½ inch at my center front so that I can be able to have at least an allowance to make the center front spine of the corset, as I would call it. Now, because I have a bust radius of 4 inches, I wouldn't be able to draw that bust radius to be able to get my curve for my corset. But this person's pattern I'm currently drafting had a bust radius of 3 inches. So with that, I could get away with a nipple to nipple measurement of 4 inches. But if you have a bust radius of 4 inches and above, I would recommend actually increasing your nipple to nipple measurement by at least 1/4 inch or ½ inch. Now, the next thing we are going to do is, and another tip is to make a mock-up. Please make a mock-up. I had to do that because I wanted to test my pattern, and it's the first time I'm doing this. Testing your pattern will just let you make that mistakes earlier and make adjustments where necessary. For me, the adjustments I just needed to make was to make my gathers at the underbust of my corset, that is at the dart of my corset. I loved how the curve sat underneath my bust. I only had problems with the ruching of my top, and I decided to gather my top right at the dart of my underbust corset so that it would just help me eliminate this bagginess at the top of my dress. Apart from that, I also decided to elongate the base of my top, and that was it. It actually looked nice and I was very, very impressed. The second tip I'm going to give, and I've stated it before, is to cut your lining and your main fabric together. Cutting it together will just let you have even amount of allowances in all your pieces. Then the next thing I do is to make notches notches, 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 and notches just help you, especially me, note where the center front and the center side of my pieces are. With that, I combine it with directional marking. I usually mark up, and marking up just lets me know, like, my north, south, east and west, right? So it helps me know my north, south, left and right. It also helps me know which part of my fabric I'm going to use as the wrong side of my fabric. This can be used for Ankara or fabrics that the right and wrong sides look alike, or on lining pieces that have same sides. Of course, we attach our interfaces to our lining and we start to pin. Now, I actually want to make a note of something, especially when you're making base corset or anything slanted. When you add your pieces together, you find out that the edges are not lining up. But don't worry, just look for that cross mark or that crossing that the left and right pieces will make. That is where you should start your sewing from. If you start your sewing before the crossing or after that crossing, you are going to find your pieces looking very, very weird. So just take note of that. You didn't make a mistake. They are not meant to align. Just take note of that crossing. And if you did well, you will note that that cross marking landed on your 1/2 inch sewing allowance that you added. Our pieces are joined and ironed, and the next thing is to mark where my boning channels will go. I make my measurements where I want them to line up, and then I sew them together. The back is done, and now we are ready to face the front. Hey, anyway, I made 2 pieces of the front of my top, and they're already joined together and pressed. And since there are 2 pieces, I don't want it to be moving around when I'm trying to make some certain gymnastics while sewing. So the first thing I do is to join the 2 pieces together. So just make a basting stitch round the top, both the armpits and sides, to just help them stay together. Now, to address the elephant in the room, we have to tackle sewing corners. And since we have 2 corners to make in this particular top, I took my time to explain how we are going to get this. And I'll just give you guys a background. Now, when we are cutting our pieces, we all know that we added 1/2 inch. Be conscious of the fact that you added 1/2 inch all around your corset, both at the side of your cup, the corner of your cup, and the sides of your cup. This is same for if you are sewing inverted curves or even also sewing yoke. This is also a tip you can take with sewing yoke. Whether the yoke or the bodies of the top, note that you added 1/2 inch at every corner. The sides, the corner at the cuff, you added 1/2 inch. Now, when you're conscious of that fact, you know that as you are sewing or joining the 2 pieces together, you know that every point of the cup or joining has to have 1/2 inch sewing allowance. So the first thing I do is to just lay it on the corset on how, or be sure that it is the right part I am trying to sew together. Now, the next thing you do is to position the horizontal part of your pieces together. That is the sides of both the cup and the corset body. You are going to align it upside down and make sure those 2 points are together. And the next thing you do is to sew half an inch from that corner. Just make sure half an inch of both corners, whether inverted or right placed, are aligned. Note that the corner of the cup should be aligned with the corner of your underbust corset body. Now you are going to sew a stitch from that half point of the corner to the side of your corset. As you can see, I sewed from, just take a tape and measure from that point to stop. Make sure it is half inch from that very corner, and it is the same thing on the body of your corset. Now once you are sure that is done, the next thing you need to do is to make a notch on the top piece, that is the corset, the cup piece. Now making a notch here is just like you're trying to make a notch on any corner. Do you understand? And one thing about notches is they open up the fabric, and just like I did, voila, the fabric is easily able to manipulate. As you can see, now that I opened up the notch, it is now easier for me to sew along the curve of my corset and also the cup. So if the notch wasn't there, as I've shown you, I tried to take it back, I wouldn't have been able to move my cup around to try to sew it together. And when you're opening your notch, you should have this excessive flap and it should go front and back like that. See, I've not even sewed it together and it's already showing like a neat, straight, sharp corner. And once you align that, you've opened your notch, you need to start sewing your next half inch seam allowance from above the notch, and it's just sew a little bit on the fabric of the notch, so that, because if you sew before the notch, it's going to like leave that corner open. So just sew a little bit on the notch, and when you open it, see, I've not ironed it here and it is already so straight. So just make that notch and then you sew from above it. Now because I want my ruching to stay basically at the dart of my corset, I just stopped right before the dart and then came on the other side and also made that same sewing. I just sewed my curve and stopped right before my dart. Just look at how that corner is looking straight. I've not ironed it at this point, and my underbust sewing is actually looking nice. For the sleeves, I wanted an Ankara lining of my sleeves, so I just cut my pieces together and sewed that together. I inserted my boning and I also gathered my skirt fabrics together. Now the next thing to do, and I would say my last and final tip, is to baste your stitches, especially at the bulk seams. I've mentioned I hate bulk seams in the past. I just baste that area, especially at the joining of the top to the skirt. I placed it where I wanted them to go, I basted them together and I sewed them. And with that, I was done. The dress was nice. I gave it to a tailor to store my clothes, attached the zipper, and it looks gorgeous. I love this dress so much. The color, befitting of a Cancer sign, in my opinion. If you would oppose, let me know in the comments. And we are done. If you like this dress, give me a like, comment, do whatever you want to do, and just expect more from me, because I have so many more designs to make and we are not going to forfeit other zodiac signs. So thank you for watching. Bye.